Okay, so here I'm going to have a look at the Leaving Certificate Higher Level Maths Paper 1 for 2015, and I'm going to have a look at question 5. So the first part here, part A, we have to solve this equation x is equal to the square root of x plus 6, where x is an element of OR. So let's start. So we've got x is equal to the square root of x plus 6. So we can see here we have a square root. There's nothing else attached to the square root, so what we can do here is just simply square both sides. So if we square the left hand side, we get x squared. Square the right hand side, you get x plus 6. You can see here that this is going to be a quadratic trinomial. So we've got x squared, we've got a minus x, we've got a minus 6 equal to 0. So just subtract x, subtract 6 from both sides. And remember, you still have this 0 on the right hand side. Okay, so we need to find the roots of this thing here, so we've got to factorize it first. And I think we can do this way. So let's see, 6 here is 6 times 1 or 3 times 2. 3 times 2 should work. And we want to multiply 3 by 2 to give us minus 6. So it's going to be different signs, so it's going to be plus and a minus, or a minus and a plus. So we want the bigger one to be minus, so we put a minus here, plus here. So that will give us x is equal to plus 3 or minus 2. Now with these surd equations here, you've got to check your answers to see if they work. So let's just check them here. Let's take x is equal to 3 first of all. Well, if we take x is equal to 3 and stick it into our original equation, you get 3 is equal to the square root of 3 plus 6. So that'll give me 3 is equal to the square root of 9. And we do get 3 is equal to 3 here. So x is equal to 3 is correct. Let's try the other one then. X is equal to minus 2. So if we take x is equal to minus 2 and do exactly the same thing, stick in minus 2 where we've got x here. So you got minus 2 is equal to the square root of minus 2 plus 6, not 4, 6. 6 here, so we end up with minus 2 is equal to the square root of minus 2 plus 6, which is 4. So here we end up with minus 2 is equal to plus 2. This doesn't work here, so we don't accept this as our answer. So the answer to part A then is, the answer then is just going to be x is equal to 3. Okay, so that's part A done. Let's have a look at part B here. It's a differentiation question. So we've got to differentiate this function here, or this expression here. So what we'll do is just let it equal to f of x. We'll call it f of x. So this is x minus the square root of x plus 6. So let me just write that in a different way here. So we're just going to say that's x plus 6 to the power of a half. It's easier to differentiate if we have a power here. So now we want f dash x here, f prime x. So we want to differentiate this. So what we do first of all is differentiate the x here. If we differentiate x, we get 1. Now you've got to differentiate this this term here. So we're going to use the chain rule here. So what we're going to do is take this half, bring it down here, and multiply. So it's going to be a half times x plus 6. Now you've got to subtract 1 from the power. So if you subtract 1 from a half, you get minus a half. Now because we're using the chain rule here, you've got to differentiate what's inside the bracket here. So if we differentiate x plus 6, well, differentiate x, you'll just get 1. Differentiate 6, you'll get 0. So we've got to multiply by 1 here. Okay, so this is our answer here, but let's just tidy it up a little bit. So we got 1 minus, we've got this half here, multiplied by, well, this is just something to the power of minus a half. That's 1 over this something, which is x plus 6 to the power of plus a half, and we're multiplying by 1, so I can just leave that out. So what I finally end up with here is 1 minus, if we multiply these two fractions here, we end up with 1 on the top, and we end up with 2 times this thing here, x plus 6 to the power of a half. Well, x plus 6 to the power of a half is just the square root of x plus 6. So this is what we get when we differentiate this function here. Okay, so let's move on to part C. I think we'll actually use this. So let's see, find the coordinates of the turning point of the function. The turning point of that function that we've just differentiated. Well, if you have the turning point of this function, if we have the differential of this function, we have it here. 1 minus 1 over 2 times the square root of x plus 6 is what we got when we differentiated the function. That really gives us the slope of any tangent to the function at any point x. Now, at a turning point, the slope of the tangent will be 0. So this is what our function will actually look like here. I've drawn it here, and I've just put in the turning point here. I know that it's going to be, using this particular program here, I know there's going to be minus 5 3/4, minus 6 1/4. So our tangent, you can imagine a tangent along here will have 0 slope. Okay, so let's just work this out then. We've got our differential here. When we differentiated the function, we got 1 minus 1 over twice the square root of x plus 6. Now we want this to be equal to 0. This will give us the slope, as I say, of any tangent. So we know that our slope at a turning point will be 0. So we want 1 minus 1 over twice the square root of x plus 6 to be equal to 0. So all we've got to do now is work out our x value for this equation here. So what I can do first is just subtract this term from both sides. That will give me this here. So 1 is equal to 1 over 2 plus 1 over 2 times the square root of x plus 6. Now what we've got here effectively is a fraction equal to a fraction, so what we can do is cross multiply, or indeed if anything divided by something is equal to 1, then the numerator and the denominator must be the same. In other words, if we have a over b is equal to 1, then a must be equal to b. So it's the same here. If 1 divided by 2 times the square root of x plus 6 is equal to 1, then 1 must be equal to 2 times the square root of x plus 6. So let's see, what can I do now? We're looking for x here, so let's divide by 2. So we'll leave the square root here, so we've got the x plus 6 here. I'm just going to divide by 2 both sides. Now I've got this square root on its own, so let's just square both sides. So I got x plus 6 is equal to a half squared is a quarter. Now we've just got to subtract 6 from both sides. So subtract 6 from this side, you'll just get x. Subtract 6 from this side, you'll get minus 5 3/4. And I think we saw that from our curve here. Yep, our x value is minus 5 3/4. So that seems to be okay. That's our x value. Let's just work out our y value. So to work out our y value here, what you've got to do is put it into our original function. Now remember, our original function was f of x is equal to x minus the square root of x plus 6. So we want f of minus 5 3/4. So this is our x value here. So instead of x here, put in our minus 5 3/4. So we get minus 5 3/4 here plus 6. So let's see, we have minus 5 3/4 here, and here we'll end up with the square root of, well, we've minus 5 3/4 plus 6. That will just give me a quarter here. Okay, so here we've got minus 5 3/4 minus the square root of a quarter. Well, what do you have to multiply by itself to give you a quarter? That would be just simply a half. So the square root of a quarter is a half. Half times a half will give you a quarter. So here we end up with minus 5 3/4 minus a half, that's minus 6 1/4. So our final answer here, our turning point is minus 5 3/4 and minus 6 1/4. So we saw that from our graph here. Our turning point here is minus 5 3/4 minus 6 1/4. And that's really it for this particular question.